Welcome. Welcome to MAME Politics, episode 37. Gotta get gas like a motherfucker. Gotta pick this guy up. Alright. Alright. Son of a bitch. Fucker. Fuck you. Yes. I just dropped off my first passenger. How's everybody doing today? On this Thursday episode of MAME Politics. Hey guys. Looking at the chat right now. I hope you don't mind this incessant beeping sound. This is Kamikaze Cabby, made by Data East from 1984. I'll turn down the sound a little bit because it's probably quite annoying. Hey Terror Toddler, hey John, hey Amy, hey Tom, hey Heather, hey No Name, hey David, hey Furious Psyop. How's it going, everybody? So let me just briefly tell you about this game. The Pandora's Box system that I'm using, the Pandora's Box 6S, I believe it's called, only came with a very specific ROM set, and some users online who actually have their own Discord channel for how to hack and modify Pandora's Box systems have about a 2000 ROM set edition that you can add to the Pandora's Box that has a bunch of more classic games, like pre-1990. Quite a few were missing off of the original Pandora's Box ROM set. Hey, Black Fox. So this was one of the games I discovered on that additional ROM set, and I was honestly really impressed by it. Partly because immediately it reminded me of the original Grand Theft Auto for the PlayStation. I believe that's the first platform it came on. Or maybe it was the PC. The top view, original Grand Theft Auto, where you can steal people's cars and stuff like that. In this game, you can't steal people's cars, but you can pick up passengers and drop them off at their drop-off point. So the point of the game is you're supposed to basically pick up passengers and drop them off at their destination. Seems like a pretty simple concept, but surprisingly the game has incredibly good, smooth controls. It's extremely playable, and it's not like one of those extremely fucking challenging, impossible to play old arcade games. It actually, you can get fairly far on one quarter. So that's my type of game. So yeah, this game, I think I would argue that it probably did inspire Rockstar Games to some degree. And I'll show you why in a second. We'll play it in a little bit. But I kind of like the fact that you can just sort of idle around in this game and nothing really happens to you except you run out of gas. Well, I guess I just got run over by a giant steamroller, so... but I like that I can just sort of leave this running for you guys and I don't have to pause it. Jesus, how many initials do I have to type in here? You kidding me? What? Wait a second. Okay. Hey Trish, how's it going? Hey Terror Toddler. I don't know if I already said hi to you. Yeah, so I guess we haven't really talked about the debate yet last night. I don't know how much there is to talk about other than the obvious things. That Bloomberg did terribly. He looked extremely tired, disinterested to be there. His posture was, his body language seemed like he didn't want to be there. I was excited by the fact that he did so badly and seemed like he was crashing and burning in terms of just his debate performance. But as Yasha Levine posted today, he was sort of confused why everyone was sort of celebrating the fact that they all think that Mike Bloomberg is done, is toast now after that first debate performance. And he's like, why is everyone, he was a sort of expressing confusion about why everyone was so sure that Bloomberg was gone, like done. We already know that he's outspending every other candidate in ad buying. Apparently in one of the Super Tuesday states, he actually bought 99.5% of all the TV airtime compared to other candidates. So not saying he bought 99.5% of all the TV airtime in that state, but compared to the other candidates running in the race, he did. And CNN was actually showing some breakdowns of how much money he had been spending in these Super Tuesday states. And what was disturbing is as they were pulling up these pie charts that were basically just all green with a tiny sliver showing the percentage spent by Bernie's campaign, Pete's campaign, and TV advertising, the CNN commentators weren't commenting on the fact of how ridiculous and over the top and corrupt that seemed. They were just sort of matter-of-factly showing it. And what was disturbing is they showed that further out, some of the later elections in this primary, Bloomberg somehow is almost tying with Bernie Sanders in the polls. Specifically, he is so in that state where he's buying 99.5% of all the ads on TV. That's just, it's shocking, but it's also not surprising that someone worth $60 billion can buy themselves into basically the top slot of the primaries with nothing really to show for it, and even doing a horrible first debate. Trish says, yes, one very disturbing point was that everyone but Sanders was fine with superdelegates picking the nominee. Yeah, I actually thought that was probably the Bernie's best moment there. Bernie's best moment was that moment, standing alone from the pack. And then his worst moment, I thought, honestly, was his answer about Bernie Bros. He could have given a much better sort of easy cutting answer to brush all that aside. And instead, he decided to pivot towards the idea that maybe it's Russian meddling that's causing all these seemingly divisive Bernie Bro attacks. And it was just like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what? No one's bringing up Russia. In fact, you'll probably notice one of the things that wasn't brought up at all in last night's debate was foreign policy. It was completely missing from the subjects that they talked about. There were a lot of other questions in the other debates about foreign policy. And this is coming right off of that pretty bad-looking New York Times interview that Bernie Sanders did, where he gave some pretty bad foreign policy answers. Now, his answers were still better than the other candidates, but that's not really saying that much. He still gave some very bad answers. So I guess I'm just going to go back to what I originally said here. Even though I probably will be voting for Bernie in the primary, even though I think he's the best candidate running in the 2020 race, I think from here on out, and I want you guys to expect this too, because I think a lot of you can probably relate to my mindset here, that we're going to have to really grit our teeth if any of us are going to be planning to vote for Bernie Sanders, because he is actually going to get worse from here on out in terms of disappointing us. I think that this is Bernie's problem, is he doesn't become more radical the more he's sort of pressed up against the wall and the closer he gets to the prize. He actually lessens his sort of radical credentials and sort of, it seems like he capitulates to what the sort of the status quo is more to sort of mold himself to be more broadly appealing. So I just want to say that up front, that that's what I honestly think we should expect moving forward with Bernie Sanders' campaign. And, that's just a bummer, but I think that's what we need to expect. Yeah, John, if I was elected vice president, I'd become like the first terrorist vice president. I would do some nutty shit. That would be basically how I would decide to go out. I probably shouldn't be saying this kind of stuff on a live stream, but um, before Bernie sold out and voted to bomb Yugoslavia, Michael Parenti talked about being Bernie's friend back in the day, says Peter H. Yes, I'm very aware of the Yugoslavia thing. I'm not so much. I actually don't really know much about Michael Parenti. I've heard of him. I've probably read some of his stuff from years back, but I'm not too familiar. CJ King says, "Hey Robbie, your debate tweets last night were hilarious. Thanks, CJ. Those are my slightly tipsy tweets. I did have a couple of drinks last night to make it through the debate. It was difficult, but it was also probably more entertaining. I mean, than all the previous debates. At least I'll give it that." Tom Collector, I actually missed that part of the debate. Tom Collector says Bloomberg seemed the most excited to steal the election at the contested convention, like in his answer. Yeah, I actually must have somehow missed that part of the debate, and but I heard about it after the fact, that the talk of a contested convention became like something that even all the panelists were talking about afterwards. It's like, whoa, dude, really? I mean, this is, in a way, it's similar to a repeat of Trump. I mean, that's how disruptive Bernie is going to be to the DNC, or he already is to the DNC. So in the same way Trump was disrupting the GOP, I think this is similar. Rotten Calm asks, what do you drink? Last night I made, you guys are going to laugh at me, but I've been making tiki cocktails. And last night I made a modified Mai Tai. But I'm really snobby about the way I make them. So they're probably, I would say, if you've got a Mai Tai like at a bar or something like that, or you got a tiki cocktail at a bar, it's probably not going to be as good as the ones that I make, because I have a lot of practice under my belt. Nice. Rotten Calm says he had one Manhattan, one Old Fashioned, and one Basil Hayden. Hey, Rotten Calm, why? I'm just curious about your username, Rotten Calm. Are you a fan of the website rotten.com? I don't really remember that website too much, but I remember that it was like trying to be like the most vile website on the internet. And I can't remember if there was anything like racist there. I mean, because I honestly looked at it when I was too young, but I remember there was some really gnarly stuff there that was from the Vietnam War that really stayed with me. And one of them was something I've actually not seen since going to rotten.com. Oh, interesting. So it's your old video game name, but I mean, is it still, it's not based off of the website? I mean, is it no relationship? Because the website, it might have been a problematic website. I can't remember. I was too young. But I do remember that rotten.com had a user, or like a guy who would visit the website, who emailed the host of the website and said, "Hey, I wanted to share these pictures with you of my father and his friend in Vietnam taking a skull of a Viet Cong soldier as a trophy." And honestly, when I saw these pictures when I was maybe like 16, I thought they were fake. That's how much it like broke my brain looking at these, because it was basically two American soldiers looking super happy, wearing those little, wire rimmed glasses, like they looked like they were straight out of Full Metal Jacket, like nerdy motherfuckers, literally severing the head of a Viet Cong in a series of photographs and boiling his severed head in a pot of water, like in the middle of the Vietnamese jungle, to do it Predator style. Like if you've seen the movie Predator where he polishes the skull, This is literally what this photo series was showing: is 2 American soldiers severing the head of a dead Viet Cong soldier, polishing his skull, and taking it home as a trophy. It was fucking nuts. And I haven't come across those photos since I saw them on that website. But I mean, all those stories you hear about people having necklaces of human ears, collecting fingers and body parts, that's all real. I mean, there was Lord of the Flies in Vietnam. That's all real. Oz whistles, all soldiers do that kind of stuff. I mean, I wouldn't say all of them do, but it's normalized in war. I mean, oh, that's weird that it still says Rampage. Yeah, I see that too. Yep. I'm sorry, John. Yeah, I already did Rampage yesterday or a couple days ago. I forgot. That's weird that it still says Rampage up on here. Well, today is not episode 35, Rampage. It is episode 37, Kamikaze Cabby. We are 2 episodes ahead. So I kind of had like a jam-packed amount of topics I wanted to bring up for you guys today. So I don't even know how many video games I'm going to be able to play or how much of Kamikaze Cabby I'm going to get to. But first of all, let me start with one of my favorite actors, the star of Twin Peaks, Kyle MacLachlan, is liking Bloomberg's tweets. And someone dug up an old picture of Kyle MacLachlan standing next to Ghislaine Maxwell at some kind of party, which really bummed me out. So, yeah, that really bummed me out. Andrew Rojas, what's this story going around about Spielberg's stepdaughter? Well, first of all, Andrew, it's not his stepdaughter. It's his adopted daughter. I don't know if Steven Spielberg actually has any stepkids, because I think he adopted all of his children after he got together with Kate Capshaw. But I think people need to be covering that delicately, because I think that, she's a 23-year-old woman, first of all. And if we get to separate her from being Steven Spielberg's daughter, I mean, I have no problem with someone who's of adult age wanting to become a sex worker or to do pornography. I think that that's fine. So I think we need to be careful talking about it, because if you want to get into some of the accusations about Steven Spielberg being a potential pedophile, or there's definitely some like things floating around online, like Isaac Cappy. I don't know if you know this guy who killed himself a few months ago, was basically spreading all these rumors online. I think he even went on Burmess's program and said that Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg were pedophiles. And it's like, I mean, sure, it's possible. But I think to link any of that together with the fact that his adopted daughter wants to start doing pornography is inappropriate, to say the least, because I think that it does sort of veer into that Christian puritanical mindset that people who do porn must be damaged, or they must have been molested, or that there must have been abuse. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's, and maybe this just makes me a pervert, but I just want to see her videos. So I guess at the end of the day, that's all I really care about. I don't know. There is, I think I brought this up on a previous episode, though. There is a really interesting, long-winded Crispin Glover poem where he accuses Steven Spielberg of being a pedophile in it, which is kind of fascinating. And he brings up the fact that Elliot in E.T. is wearing like underwear the whole time. Which in and of itself, if you watch E.T. again now, I think most people would be like, "Oh, this is a little bit sketchy that Elliot's in his underwear for this long in the movie." Um, it honestly made me a little uncomfortable the last time I watched it. You don't see that in movies anymore. It definitely seems inappropriate to watch it now. Also, Steven Spielberg, in his original script for Raiders of the Lost Ark with Lawrence Kasdan, wanted to make Marion, the character that Indiana Jones had gotten together with. They wanted to make her 12 years old, um, when they got together. So you remember the line from Raiders of the Lost Ark where she says, "I was just a kid," or "I was just a girl," and Indiana Jones says to her, "You knew what you were doing." In the script, there was some backstory and more lines about how young she was when they got together, and she was either 12 or 13 or 14. I can't remember it. That was removed from the script, and it sort of inferred in Raiders of the Lost Ark that Indiana Jones banged a 12-year-old, or a 13-year-old, or 14, either one. Still makes Indiana Jones a kind of a creepy motherfucker. Um, you got that vibe from Phantasm, really, Rotten? What? How so? I don't. I didn't get that vibe at all from Phantasm. Stop ruining my movies, Robbie. John Gold says. I still love to watch E.T. Honestly, E.T. I think is one of the probably the best Spielberg movies and one of my favorite childhood movies still. Also has some of John Williams' best score work. The bike chase scene at the end of E.T. Uh, is honestly like some of the most pleasurable, like nostalgia film watching for me. Period. Especially with that John Williams score. If you haven't seen that bike chase scene in a long time, go back and fucking watch that. The John Williams music during that shit is insanely good. It's just such a good series of shots too. Even the way it shows like the government agents descend on the neighborhood is so cool. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, Carl Knight, Jaws, definitely probably Spielberg's best. John Gold, stop ruining my movies, Robbie. Well, I don't know how big of a fan of Scrooge you are, John, or Bill Murray, but when Abby was here during Christmas break, um, she really wanted to watch Scrooge, and I started talking to her about something that I had read about Bill Murray during the filming of Scrooge and how much of an asshole he was, and how he made his co-star in the movie cry multiple times. And she got mad at me. She was like, she basically said the same thing you said, John. She's like, don't ruin Bill Murray for me. Um, if you really want to get mad at Bill Murray, read about how Ghostbusters almost didn't happen because Bill Murray had gotten it into his head that he was going to win an Oscar for a terrible, terrible drama that he tried to get off the ground called Razor's Edge, that he actually used as a negotiating tool for Ghostbusters. He promised the studio he would do Ghostbusters as long as they helped him fund Razor's Edge, and he disappeared in like the French Alps for a year without being able to be contacted on the telephone. Dan Aykroyd, all the people involved in Ghostbusters were like hella pissed, and they were worried Bill Murray literally just ditched them and wasn't going to be in the movie because they couldn't get a hold of him. And then suddenly he shows up like 3 days before production, and he's acting like he doesn't want to be there and he hates being there. And everybody's just like, what the fuck is wrong with this asshole? So I don't know how Bill Murray got this reputation of being this happy-go-lucky guy who likes to party with college kids. But from what I've read about him in the 80s, he was like one of the biggest divas in Hollywood. And it will really make you kind of think he's a dick, to say the least. Um, so the few other things I wanted to bring up today. I mean, what else from the debate should we even talk about? I mean, was there really anything worth talking about? Mayor Pete kind of lost his shit. He looked pissed for a good 2 minutes during the debate. You could see his facial muscles sort of involuntarily clenching up like he was getting really angry. That was interesting to see. I think Obama, when Obama used to lose his cool, it was more performative. He had like a little performance down for losing his cool and acting like he had been disrespected. Pete didn't really have that dialed in. He didn't really study Obama's mad face good enough. So maybe in a year or so, Pete will study all of Obama's mannerisms and be able to duplicate them all perfectly. Tom Collector, yeah, Bernie was definitely more aggressive, he says. He seemed like he may have another heart attack. I noticed too that Bernie was really pushing, it seemed like he was pushing himself harder in this debate. Um, I don't know about another heart attack. I mean, from what I understand about what happened to him, it wasn't that bad. But yeah, I mean, he didn't look great at this last debate. Like his face was kind of splotchy. I mean, he is, an old man. So I mean that does worry me. He doesn't seem to have the energy that some of these other older candidates do, which is strange. I mean, what are they drinking baby blood? Like what the hell? And I don't even think Bernie Sanders is unhealthy. Like I don't think he smokes or anything. So it's just interesting that some of these other more elite politicians who are his age look so much younger. Biden looked like they rolled him out of the morgue though, said Tom Collector. Yeah, rolled him out of the morgue and painted, his face orange. So they made him look like he was not totally dead. Andrew Rojas says, I find it very interesting Zimmerman is suing Warren and Pete. Um, he's been trying to sue a lot of people. Like, I think he tried to sue Trayvon Martin's estate or family. He's tried to sue many people. I think he just wants his name still in the media. I don't know if he's gotten anywhere with any of these lawsuits so far. But Biden is not sedentary, Robbie. Yeah, he doesn't sit down and watch TV like that man that he made fun of for being obese at his rally. Yeah, Obnobs. I don't know why that is that it's showing episode 35. Something got glitched out on YouTube. And goddamn, I don't even think I mean, am I even going to get anywhere trying to talk to YouTube tech support to try to figure this shit out? I feel like my account's hanging by a thread as it is. I mean, I'm already fully demonetized. I'm like worried to stir up any shit with YouTube, thinking that they might go through some of my videos and be like, oops, we didn't notice this is against our terms of service. Your account's gone. Bye. Um, so I am worried about that happening, even like communicating with them. That's how shitty the internet is right now. But I get to stream to you guys on here. Well, somewhere in this country or somewhere in the world, there is a data farm where they're just allowing people to upload hundreds of hours or thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours a day, probably, of 4K HD video content at 60 frames per second. I mean, it's an insane amount of data that YouTube is just giving away for free because they're nice. They want to give everybody all these free things, right? It's just such a fucked up thing when you think about it because this whole time we could have been figuring out ways to cheaply and efficiently stream HD video from our own web servers. And look how fucking much this set us back. I mean, honestly, like I wouldn't even know where to start to do that. I would probably have to hire someone, you know, to even remotely figure that out for me. But by now, 2020, it should be really easy for you to stream your own HD video straight off your own server. Like that should be a kind of a given. That should be totally easy to do now, even if it's not as technically as high quality as YouTube. It would be good enough, right? But no, we don't. We don't even. It's like nobody even cares because YouTube is great. Scuffed World Order, isn't even getting the most delegates going to be hard for Bernie? Absolutely. He already has less delegates than Pete Buttigieg, even though he won the popular vote in Iowa. And I think I mean, seems like he won in New Hampshire also. So somehow Pete still has more delegates according to the current count. So if that sort of, if Pete still is that close to Bernie in the polling or in the vote counts, then that's going to continue to be the case. Pete is going to continue to get more delegates. There's no question about that. And that just proves again that this is not an actual democratic process, because the delegates or super delegates can arbitrarily just choose who they want. And even when some of the delegates do choose correctly and go according to the vote count, like for example at the 2012 RNC, Ron Paul got something like 5% of the total vote, and that gave him delegates. Now, what they did at the RNC in 2012 is they actually drowned out his delegate roll call. They made sure that nobody would see it. They tried to block the cameras. They tried to cut the mics. They did some crazy shady shit just to make sure that people weren't even aware of how many delegates had chosen Ron Paul. So even though Ron Paul had zero chance of getting the nomination, that's how much he was a threat to the RNC convention, is they needed to silence the roll call of whatever tiny measly amount of delegates that he had. So that shit's just all super, super corrupt. Join the chat, everybody. Furious Psyop. Thanks for letting us know that. I don't even know how to count the amount of people who are participating in the chat, unless I do it manually. There's a few other things I wanted to talk to you guys about today. If I start talking about this, you guys will need to stop me, because I'll probably end up talking about it for the rest of the episode. But first, let me ask you guys: do you believe? How many people in this chat believe that the Democratic Party and that Hillary's campaign was solely responsible for concocting the Trump-Russia collusion theory by hiring Fusion GPS to make the Steele dossier? How many people? Terror Toddler, I'm going to get to that. I promise. I will get to that article as well. But how many people in here believe that the Steele dossier was solely the construction of the Democratic Party and the Hillary campaign? So it seems like, and just judging by your responses, it seems like about half of the people in here, or maybe 1/3 of the people in here, think or believe that Hillary's campaign and the DNC was responsible for concocting the Trump-Russia collusion theory, and 2/3 to a half of you guys do not believe that. Well, I think here's what I find really interesting. So if some of you guys don't follow me on Twitter or haven't really followed this thread of mine, let me explain something to you. There is a neoconservative outlet funded by a top GOP mega donor named Paul Singer, who's also a neocon, who was largely behind Marco Rubio's campaign in 2015, who wanted to dig up Trump opposition research. And this outlet that Paul Singer funded, Washington Free Beacon, he chose to use them as an intermediary to hire Fusion GPS. Now, this neoconservative outlet, Washington Free Beacon, has people who are related to Bill Kristol through family marriage. Michael Goldfarb is in the Kristol family. He runs the Washington Free Beacon. Eli Lake also used to write and hang out with the people from Washington Free Beacon. In fact, Michael Goldfarb, who worked for a Georgian lobbying firm at one point, this is really early stages Cold War 2.0, when Georgia and Saakashvili were trying to rile up Cold War 2.0 sentiment. Back in like 2010, 2011, Eli Lake was actually taking bribes from this Georgian lobbying firm to write anti-Russian stories in D.C. Now, this is back in 2011. Let me read something to you really quickly. Ken Silverstein, in 2011, wrote this article. And this is actually very foundational to a very heavy agenda. I can't make this more clear that this article by Ken Silverstein from October 5th, 2011 for Salon.com called Neoconservatives Hype a New Cold War was hugely important to the narrative of a very heavy agenda. Now, the players who are involved here are Eli Lake, Bill Kristol, and Michael Goldfarb. Two of those people are from Washington Free Beacon. Now, when, the narrative you'll hear most commonly is that the Steele dossier wasn't constructed until Chris Steele was hired by Fusion GPS after Hillary's campaign took over the Fusion GPS project, which they started funding it. So the story goes, Paul Singer and Washington Free Beacon decided to stop funding it and instead pass the data or pass the project over to the Hillary campaign so they can continue funding it. And it wasn't until Hillary's campaign retained Fusion GPS's service was Chris Steele hired to write the Steele dossier. Now, what's very fascinating to me about all this is the Democrats in general were not very savvy about Russia. In fact, they wanted to do a reset on Russia. Remember Hillary's reset button? The neocons, however, like Eli Lake, Washington Free Beacon, Paul Singer, their motive and agenda was to undo that reset and to create sentiment in this country and all this pressure against people in D.C. and against Russia that we need to be more adversarial towards them. So this is what's really interesting to me is I've always been really suspicious of the idea that these neocons had nothing to do with the Chris Steele dossier. That the same neocons who were already concocting all this false fear-mongering about Russia for years and years and years had nothing to do with concocting a fake dossier showing links between Trump and the Kremlin. I've always found that not believable on its face, simply because one of my biggest focuses has been showing how the neocons largely created this Cold War 2.0 Russia scaremongering climate. Now, that being said, you won't really find any articles at all showing that there's some suspicion here, showing that the neocons probably had something to do with trying to concoct a Trump-Russia theory. You won't find anything like that out there, because in all the articles describing, when Fusion GPS and Washington Free Beacon were first exposed as working together, this timeline was established very early on that the Steele dossier had nothing to do with Washington Free Beacon. Completely unrelated. Hillary campaign's idea, etc. But if any of you have seen A Very Heavy Agenda, you'll understand how unlikely it is that the neoconservatives had nothing to do with this. Because it's perfectly in line with the agenda they were pushing several years before. So this brings me to something very fascinating to me, is that Eli Lake, who is one of these regime change neocons, who was a pioneer and very instrumental in pushing this Russia hysteria climate. In fact, he was on the tip of the spear. Very few other journalists that had the esteem that he did were pushing this around the time that he was. He was doing it very early on. So why is it now that Eli Lake, the guy who was instrumental in creating the Cold War 2.0 hysteria climate in the United States, who wrote for the Daily Beast, who wrote for Bloomberg and all these different outlets. Why is it now that Eli Lake, February of this year, actually today, he just released an article that reads almost identically to an article by Michael Tracy, Aaron Mate, or Matt Taibbi debunking Russiagate? If we can correctly assume that what Eli Lake is putting out about Russiagate is some form of manipulative limited hangout, what does that mean that Eli Lake is now piggybacking off of the works of Michael Tracy, Matt Taibbi, and Aaron Mate, and putting out a virtually identical narrative, which at the same time is deliberately trying to decouple the Steele dossier from the neocons? What does that mean? Because I'm not accusing Mate, Taibbi, or Tracy of trying to hide the Paul Singer Steele dossier potential connections. They just don't happen to write about it. They don't really cover it. They haven't, as far as I know, really explored it very much. So it is strange that Eli Lake would come out now, piggyback on all their research, and at the same time reinforce that narrative that he and the Washington Free Beacon had nothing to do with the Steele dossier. I find that deeply fascinating because Eli Lake probably knows more than almost anybody else about how that was passed on to the Hillary campaign. So I'm going to propose for you guys two theories here. Two possible theories about what actually happened with the Steele dossier. The Hillary camp, who took on Fusion GPS, explicitly did so because Free Beacon and the neocon side had convinced them that Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS could dig up Kremlin-Trump ties as a means to smear Trump. The other possibility is that there was a deliberate baton pass to the Hillary camp from Free Beacon and Paul Singer to intentionally hide top GOP donors Paul Singer's actual role in the Steele dossier. Now, I know I'm making fun of Scott Adams saying Assange was laundered, but I'm just going to sort of reread one of my tweets that I made earlier today about what I think happened. There is no doubt in my mind that the baton pass from Free Beacon and Paul Singer was intentionally done to launder the neocon GOP elite role in concocting a fake Trump-Russia connection, and extremely convenient that Free Beacon's pal Eli Lake is helping to bury this possibility. So I'm just curious to hear from you guys. I mean, I know this is very convoluted what I'm trying to explain, and it might be a little bit hard to follow. And it also may not seem like that big of a deal. I mean, I think Thaddeus Russell responded to me when I sent this to him, said something like, oh, so it was the Republican neocons, not the Democrat neocons who started this. I think he was kind of mocking the distinction. But I think it's an important distinction because the Republicans all want to pretend they're behind Trump now. So what does it mean that Trump isn't trying to expose the Republican neocons who tried to derail his campaign and even get him impeached? What does that mean? Is Trump afraid of them? Does Trump want to maintain the illusion of a big tent? And also, why would the Democrats want to take most of the blame for this? Why would they take most of the heat for concocting this? Now, you'll find something else I posted on Twitter today. I posted about an hour ago, where right after leaving the Trump administration on November 11, 2017, and keep in mind this was after the Washington Free Beacon had already admitted to being behind the original Fusion GPS Trump Oppo research project, but denied being behind the Steele dossier. So let me repeat that. This appearance by Steve Bannon on Breitbart Radio took place after after Free Beacon admitted their role in doing Trump Oppo research, and Free Beacon denying their role in being behind the Steele dossier. This appearance by Steve Bannon comes after that, and also comes right after he leaves the Trump administration. So I'm going to play this through the microphone. It might be a little muffled, but I just want you guys to hear this because, what does Steve Bannon know at this point to make such a big claim like this? Because Steve Bannon is essentially saying is the same thing I'm telling you guys now that all the right-wing media has been trying to bury and hide for the past 2 years or 3 years. You will not hear what Steve Bannon is saying now reinforced on any right-wing media outlet. In fact, the opposite. They all try to deny it, bury it, pretend there's not really a connection. So it's very interesting to me that Steve Bannon is actually saying the same things I've been telling you now. So listen to this.
Paul Singer, the Washington Free Beacon. Was it Goldfarb and that crowd over there, Crystal, Bill, all the Never Trump guys. Okay. Understand something, America. They're the ones that did that dossier, right? They're the ones who put that dossier together, and stuff is so crude. So crude. A pack of lies. To put a pack of lies about that together on a man that's running for president of the United States, and then to hand it off to the Democrats. His name is exactly Paul Singer.
So Steve Bannon is, I don't know if you guys caught that, but Steve Bannon is directly saying, he's basically laying out the same theory that I have, that they passed on the dossier to the Democrats. The Democrats weren't solely behind this dossier, and it's just a coincidence that they got this, project from these neocons. Steve Bannon is literally accusing these neocons, right-wingers, Paul Singer, that one of the biggest GOP donors, of being one of the primary people behind the Steele dossier. So what could this mean? Well, why aren't any of the Republicans now talking about how the Steele dossier had something to do with one of their top mega donors? That's a dumb question. It's obvious. This guy bankrolls probably most of the Republican Party. So it's a pretty easy answer as to why they won't go after him. In fact, if you look at the Horowitz report that came out about a month or two ago, there is not one single mention of Paul Singer. There is one mention of Washington Free Beacon, but it's just mostly to just be like, nah, that wasn't really anything having to do with this. So I just think it's really, really important to zoom out from all this and see it as a bipartisan effort that was largely kickstarted by a specific neocon faction in D.C. That this was not the Democrats. This is not a partisan thing. This was concocted by specific hardcore neoconservatives who calculated the fuck out of this. I don't know who McAfee is, Andrew Rojos. Tell me who you're talking about. Potted rodent. There's no difference between neocons and neoliberals as long as they are the ruling class. I disagree. I do think there is an important distinction to draw between them. Even though Tulsi's campaign tried to equate them together, I think that's actually wrong. Neoliberalism has more to do with an economic worldview, and sort of a weaponization of identity politics to feed into, protecting the ruling class in the U.S. empire. Neoconservatism is a specific ideology that comes from the school of thought of Leo Strauss and Irving Kristol. Now, if you're using the term more broadly, like sometimes I do on this podcast, then I could see there's more of an equivalent to draw. But I do think it's important sometimes to I personally wouldn't go around using the terms interchangeably, like neocons and neolibs are the same, or they're both the same amount of warmonger. But that's just my personal preference. I just don't. I don't use the words interchangeably. Yeah, I hope you're not talking about John McAfee, Andrew. I don't think I would bring him on the Media Roots Radio podcast. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I mean, do you think that Michael Tracy, Matt Taibbi, and Aaron Mate are missing important details about Russiagate? Or do you think they've done a thorough job covering it? I ask that because Eli Lake is essentially putting out the same narrative and piggybacking on all their work right now. Now, we can already say pretty clearly that Eli Lake's coverage of anything is very manipulative and has some kind of agenda that's part of some kind of ruling class DC faction. So it makes me wonder if this is what's really being missed here. If this Paul Singer Fusion GPS Steele dossier thing is something that is to be remained hidden, that people wanted hidden, and that Eli Lake is pushing this stuff out there because he knows that by doing so, it will continue to be hidden. That's also something I wonder. One thing I noticed that those people also don't talk about in terms of debunking Russiagate is they never bring up the Shearer memo, which is another quote-unquote dossier that was going around D.C. that helped fuel the Trump-Russia collusion theories, and that actually got kicked up to the State Department. A separate memo entirely. Now, at one time, some Republicans were openly talking about this second memo. Nunes was actually really focused on it for a while. During the hearings, the impeachment hearings, Ted Cruz and a few other people almost let it slip. They almost mentioned the Shearer memo. They were talking about many dossiers. Now, why is that something that they also don't like talking about anymore? What is that about? I mean, why are those things being ignored? That's curious to me. And I'm not saying any of these people I mentioned are intentionally ignoring them, besides, of course, Eli Lake. But I'm interested in exploring those areas that remain mostly unexplored and aren't folded into this larger Russiagate narrative. I'm really interested in that. Because that's part of what I was doing with a very heavy agenda, is trying to find all these little threads and include them in this larger narrative that I felt like people were completely not picking up on. Andrew Rojas, I just don't find McAfee interesting, or I don't really know what he's bringing to the table to bring him on Media Roots. I mean, the only thing that's interesting to me about him is that he's an eccentric who is accused of murdering his neighbor and got like shat on by people. Like, he's hired women to take shits on him. Honestly, that's the most interesting things about him. And then he's like a software, guy who cashed out on this antivirus software. I don't particularly find him more interesting than what I just mentioned. John Gold. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. I would also say that it's really amusing to me to see some of these people who shat on truthers for years and years and years to be like, if you're not talking about the OPCW report, you're a coward, or only the brave journalists are willing to step into this. It's like, you fucking hypocrites. You guys all bashed truthers and acted like we were all crazy. Well, you weren't brave enough to do shit. So I find that kind of amusing to see them acting like they're the bravest motherfuckers. It's like, of course these attacks in Syria are probably false flags. I mean, yes, it's important to talk about the OPCW report, but we already probably knew that it was a false flag. A whistleblower, yeah, it's largely confirmed that it probably was not really a chemical weapons attack, but from the very first, red line chemical weapons attack, people like us in this chat were like, no, something's really fishy about this shit. So I don't know. I just find that kind of funny. Like, where these litmus tests now where it's like, if you don't talk about such and such, or like I'm brave for talking about this. It's like this sort of weird backpatting thing. It's like I don't think I'm brave for talking about 9/11. Um, yeah. Oh no, no name. I didn't say that they were resembling the neocons. I was saying, what does it mean when Eli Lake is piggybacking on all of their research and writings and sort of containing it into his own narrative? How does that help his agenda? That's what I'm curious about. And the only thing I can point to is that those three people that I mentioned, like Eli Lake, also do not cover the Paul Singer role in Fusion GPS and the potential neocon connections to the Trump Russia collusion theory. So that's something that they all four have in common. I'm not saying that there is any kind of deliberate neocon limited hangout coming from them. I just think that's very interesting. Why all of a sudden a new neocon who was instrumental in spreading Cold War 2.0 hysteria, who was a pioneer in it, who was very influential in it, is now suddenly being like, yeah, Taibbi, Tracy, and Aaron Mate, they're right. And here's all my, here's a big piece that I've written for Commentary Magazine, which you can read right now. It's like, geez, it seems like it's almost 20 pages long, where he's just piggybacking on all their work. I mean, that is a very odd. I'm not saying I know exactly why that is. It's just, I think it just deserves scrutiny and question. Like, what the hell is Eli Lake up to? This is ultimately about Eli Lake and what he's trying to hide. This is not about Tracy and those other people. But it needs to be mentioned because it's important to look at what Lake's doing and be like, what the fuck is happening here? Did he have buyer's remorse? That would be taking him at face value, that he has buyer's remorse. That he thought that the Russia hysteria that he was instrumental in contributing to went too far. I don't take things at face value normally when it comes to neocons. You know me and how I treat neocons. So when it comes to the idea that Eli Lake has suddenly regretted what he did and he has buyer's remorse, I don't buy it. I think there's something else going on here. I really do. See you later, Oz. Lake is simply harvesting a new energy. He's an opportunist, says Oz whistles. That could be part of it too. I mean, there is something where it's like he's probably smart enough to know that debunking Russiagate and a lot of these things will give him more credibility in the future. Because at a certain point, people are going to look back and be like, yeah, this was mostly bullshit. I mean, they'll have to. I feel like that a lot of people will have to do that. So maybe Eli Lake is just being an opportunist and trying to get ahead of that so that he can have some stuff written down that makes him appear to be on the right side of history. That's also potentially a possibility. No, I am not smoking a J. I'm smoking a some vape. Tom Collector, do you think Kitchens was actually given a check to change his worldview so dramatically from his early views? I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. I don't. I was not really ever a fan of Hitchens before the Iraq War. So that was my entry point into Hitchens, was as an Islamophobic neocon piece of shit. So that was really, I mean, that was my first foray into Hitchens. Watch Parenti Hitchens. When was that from, John? I feel like I might have come across it on YouTube at some point. Let me see how long I've been going. Oh, wow. Almost, geez, over an hour. No MAME in a whole hour so far. That's crazy. Hitchens exposés on Hell's Angels. I mean, what is there to say about Hell's Angels except for they're a bunch of fucking shitty people? I have a specific extra disdain for bikers and biker, not gangs, but just like bikers, like the cosplay midlife crisis guys who fucking think that they're, like the guys who think that they're in the Hells Angels, but they're just like suburban dads. I don't know. I have a special deep hatred for those people, deep in my bones. Oh, he called Mother Teresa Hell's Angel. Oh, I see. I think David Zucker, the guy who made Naked Gun, must have been a Hitchens fan early on, because I don't know if you guys remember Naked Gun 33 and a third. They do a fake Oscars performance, like a fake Oscars ceremony. And there's a Mother Teresa movie that they show as one of the Oscar contenders, and she's like dancing around. And like she like yanks a homeless kid's cane out from under him, and the kid falls to the ground, and she's like, it's pretty funny. It just shows her like fucking with all these like homeless children and like singing this happy song. That for some reason that was like one of the parts from Naked Gun 33 and a third I remember the most. Leslie Nielsen, R.I.P. Died a while ago, didn't he? I still get a kick out of that whole thing where he's supposed to be impersonating Phil Donahue at the Oscars. He's just like a gray-haired guy and he puts glasses on. Carl Knight, I don't want to burst your bubble, but David Zucker is like basically a neocon now. He's like a total fucking like Bush stooge neocon. Jeremy says, not a coincidence that Trump pardoned Bernard Carrick at epicenter of 9/11 New York operation. Well, I spent 2 episodes talking about how bizarre it was and how much more attention it needs to get that he pardoned him. I mean, I think Trump is smart enough to know that out of all those pardons on that day, that was the craziest one, was Bernard Carrick, and he chose like Blagojevich and some other more sensationalist pardons on that same day to kind of just bury that in the media. And it worked. I mean, I don't know if you noticed the media coverage that day. Bernard Carrick's name was like barely in any of the stories. It was just like a footnote. And it was all about Blagojevich and the cartoonish nature of him. It's weird to see him with gray hair now, too, when he's coming out of jail. So I'm wondering what Stone and Manafort are thinking right now. That Trump is willing to pardon Bernard Kerik already, but he's not even like, is he going to pardon me? Like, I'd seriously be worried if I was Roger Stone and Manafort. At this point, I would be thinking, fuck, maybe Trump is not going to pardon me. This motherfucker fucked us. Like, it's kind of weird. I mean, what political risk would it be right now? I mean, maybe Trump's going to pardon him at the end of his term, but like, what's only 40 minutes? Oh, you're talking about the Parenti thing. Omar Rana, yeah, Trump is a narcissist who enjoys pardoning people because it makes him feel big, like he's flexing his muscles. That's what I think too, and that's why he was just, randomly, like, no one, like, what would it have gained him at all to pardon that Navy SEAL who stabbed that Iraqi kid? That was just a weird move. Like, who was he trying to please? I still don't fully understand what lobbying forces were trying to get Trump to pardon that guy and like what that gained him. I mean, I think even pardoning Stone would be less politically risky than that. Andrew Rojas says, I still have not watched an Indiana Jones movie. Wow, that's crazy. They're pretty good. I mean, I still highly enjoy the Indiana Jones films, even though Part 2 is especially a racist movie. It's kind of shocking to think it even got made in the first place. Part 2 is like one of the most racist movies against Indians I've ever seen. It was made in like 1985, 1986. So as a kid, I as a white kid growing up in the suburbs, when I watched Temple of Doom, the second Indiana Jones movie, I thought that Indian food was the scariest thing ever because of that scene where they sit down and eat like the monkey brains and the snake surprise and all that shit. Watch Temple of Doom again now, John, in the 2020 era, and you will understand why it is such a racist film. I mean, in fact, it's so racist. I think it was banned in India. Omar Rana, are you Indian? Because I remember reading this that it was banned when it came out, and oddly, M. Night Shyamalan was hired to write Crystal Skull originally, and I thought that was an interesting choice because of all, he probably remembers Temple of Doom being hella racist too. He's Indian. Oh, okay. I mean, but one could also argue that the Indiana Jones movies were trying to emulate serial films from like the early or like the 30s or whatever, the 1940s. And Temple of Doom probably comes the closest to doing that of any of them. It's all about Raiders of the Lost Ark, though. It's definitely all about Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, that movie is hard to top. There's really, I don't think, The Last Crusade is pretty good, but Peter H., are you talking about Part Time from Crystal Skull? You're a teacher? Part Time. And it's really funny too because Peter, I don't know, do you remember that there are other takes of him saying that sound like totally fine? What the fuck were they thinking? That movie is a disaster. I think Harrison Ford just got like he just took edibles for the whole movie Because why does he act so much like Han Solo in Force Awakens, but he acts nothing like Indiana Jones and Crystal Skull? He acts like a stone zombie for the whole movie. Oh, fun anecdote about Harrison Ford. It was on some movie podcast that my wife was listening to, where during the filming of Raiders of the Lost Ark, his driver, to take him to the set, waited outside his house for like 20 minutes, and the driver was getting really worried because they, the shooting was coming up soon. They wanted to get there a little bit early. He was nervous Harrison Ford wasn't going to show up and come to the car. So he waited outside his house for like 20 minutes, and Harrison Ford comes out and he asks the guy, he's like, "Do you have any papers?" And the guy's like, "No." So Harrison Ford runs back into his house, and 10 minutes later, he comes out with a small sauce, what do you call them? Like one of those really tiny, small, not a pan, but like a pot, a sauce pot, like to heat up marinara sauce with the lid on. And as he gets back into the backseat of the car, Harrison Ford opens up this saucepan, and he had cooked a bunch of marijuana just like raw inside the saucepan in order to smoke it. And he lifts open the lid to the saucepan and just like starts inhaling the plumes of smoke coming out of it. So that's how much of a stoner Harrison Ford was back during the filming of Raiders of the Lost Ark, is that he couldn't find papers, so that he desperately needed to smoke weed so bad he did it out of a saucepan. Probably wasted like over a whole eighth of weed doing so. Hey, Ned, how's it going? Ned, did you see that really disturbing Groundhog Day commercial where you are in it? Did you see that? That was weird. Was that a de-aged Bill Murray, or did they like splice something in from Groundhog Day? I didn't really understand what I was watching, but as I was watching it, I was like, this commercial is like, just for some reason, it's like unsettling to watch. I think it's like a bank commercial. Yeah, check it out. It was a Super Bowl commercial about Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, and the actor who plays Ned Ryerson's in it too. So, has anybody actually been able to find any of Steven Spielberg's daughter's porn videos? Because apparently they were all removed from the internet. But I'm surprised that they're not findable now. Not even like 8chan or any of those websites are pumping them out. You know what's actually some of the best de-aging CGI I've ever seen was in a terrible, terrible new film called Terminator Dark Fate. Spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen it. Turn your audio off now. The movie opens up with a flashback of Sarah Connor and John Connor de-aged like on some Mexican beach, and it looks totally convincing. Totally convincing. Really the only good part of the entire movie. It actually looked more convincing than the de-aging version of Princess Leia and Mark Hamill in Rise of Skywalker, I thought. Obnobs. That crystal ball quote you tweeted, or the tweet that you just quoted of Crystal Ball, I actually think it's like kind of humbling of her to admit that she used to have like shittier beliefs. Like, I think that it's because I respect people more who are willing to talk about their past mistakes and like beliefs that they used to have that they regret now than people who pretend that they were always the smartest person in the room. Because I think all too often what we see is a lot of people with mysterious, undetectable past. Like, what was their career like before they did this kind of thing? You don't know. And then all of a sudden we're just supposed to trust them now for acting like super edgy or radical. So I like it that Crystal Ball that she's fully admitting to her past mistakes. And she's actually spoken quite openly about how she used to be a big Obama supporter. She got really disillusioned with the Democratic Party. So I actually respect that. I don't really care for her show too much because it seems, well, I won't really comment on it, but her co-host especially is really sus. And he has actually brought on Foundation for Defense of Democracy's neocons during the Iran war escalation to just like softball them. And I thought that was really odd and gross, to say the least. Oh, she was a Warren supporter also, I see. Yeah, I don't mind Crystal. I mind her co-host. Her co-host seems like a real gross motherfucker. Like him and Michael Malice both simultaneously released like a book about how the new right is actually really good and how we should pay attention to it and all this shit. It's like, no, I'm sorry. I'm not going to pay attention to something that's obviously a fucking psyop. You kidding me? I haven't even played any of this goddamn game for you guys. Do you even care? Should we do it? So let's play some GTA. Got a passenger. Okay. 2 blocks up, 16 blocks over. Boom. So you have to drop off at least one passenger to beat the level. So do you guys understand why I think this is the influence to Grand Theft Auto? Okay, 18 blocks over, 7 blocks down. Shit! 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 Ah! Fuck. Wait. Down one. Doom. Oh no, I'm like flashing. What does that mean? Oh. I like this game because it controls and the collision is pretty solid for an old game that looks like this. Wow. I'm doing awful. I need gas. Okay. Where's all the people though? I don't see anybody to pick up. Oh, there's somebody. Holy shit, that's far away. Okay. Here we go. Yes. Wait, what happened? Did I get hit too hard and you wanted to leave my car? Crazy Taxi. Yes, I will be able to play Crazy Taxi once my new MAME system gets built. I put in a custom order for a joystick PC combination where I can play games like Crazy Taxi and pretty much all the later Sega arcade games, the 3D ones. Can't do it now though. Wow. Why does it look like Rygar? Where the hell do I pick up anybody? This level's like, is this infinite? Jesus. I don't see anybody. Where are the humans? Oh, there's some. Okay. 11 blocks over, 37 blocks down. Jesus. Oh, fuck. Got fucked up. Trish asks, will Abby get any sort of payout if she wins the case? I hope so. That's a good question. I think I'd have to look at the actual lawsuit. From what I understand, it's just the $1,000 speaking fee. It's making it literally about what she would have been paid had she not signed the loyalty pledge. I can't actually answer that in detail though. I'll have to ask Abby. What's going to happen when they shaft Bernie? Nothing. What do you mean what's going to happen? Everybody's just going to acquiesce and probably vote for Pete Buttigieg or someone else. I mean, who the hell knows? I've been going for almost an hour and a half. I feel like I've exhausted all my topics for today. Trying to think if there's anything I missed. I mean, just some obvious stuff. Elliot Abrams, Trump appointed neocon guy who was instrumental in running death squads in South America. He is openly talking about how much of a threat Telesur is right now and how it should be shut down. This is after the Trump administration's sanctions on different South American countries actually caused Telesur, the USA Telesur arm, to basically have to shut down most of their operations already. So I guess the neocons like Elliot Abrams are openly talking about Telesur now, which is interesting. Oh yeah, Tara Toddler wanted me to talk about this, so I'm gonna finish off this episode by talking about an article in Jacob and Mag that came out. I think it came out, I want to say yesterday. I don't see a date on it. Hold on. It came out at least within the last couple of days. It's a brand new article. Hold on. I got to use the little boys' room. I'll be right back to finish talking about this. So, Tara Toddler wanted me to comment on this article. It's from Jacobin, and it's something that I've been commenting on for a while. I like to refer to this mentality as CIA socialism. And arguably, it's not just a mentality. It's probably some kind of psyop to ruin the anti-imperialist left activist movement in this country. In the same way that, in a different way than trying to toxify the anti-war movement by lowering the bar of what it means to be anti-war. This mentality, or this psyop, is trying to inject the anti-imperialist movement with tendencies or a desire to basically want to invade and dunk on other countries' human rights abuses and look outward instead of inward at our own problems in this country and our own foreign policy. That's the general mindset. And there's a lot of YouTube commentators and YouTube channels that I simply cannot watch because they use phrases like Iranian imperialism or even Russian imperialism. Even Chinese imperialism makes me cringe. Now, China probably has more of a reach worldwide than those other two entities I just mentioned. I mean, by far. But yeah, I can post a link to the article here. I'll do that right now. Yeah, the regional imperialism paradigm. Yeah, no, Obnobs, I'm not saying China is imperialist. I'm just saying if you're using that term, um, there's all these people, let's just say there's all these people now who are buying into these sort of conspiracies that China is trying to take over the United States. I even heard someone who seemed relatively intelligent on the Joe Rogan show bring up the idea that fentanyl was a Chinese conspiracy to kill us here. So, yeah, there's a lot of different things like that floating around. But back to the article. Wait, did I actually post the right article just now? No, I did not. I accidentally posted the article to Eli. Sorry about that. I just accidentally posted Eli Lake's article piggybacking on a Michael Tracy Russiagate narrative. Here is the Jacobin article right now. I think, yeah. Okay. The title of the article is called Anti-Imperialism Doesn't Mean Defending Authoritarianism. Okay. So let's just first address the headline, because how many anti-imperialists actually defend authoritarianism? How many of them do that? I don't really know any that do personally. I know that a lot of anti-imperialists don't talk about alleged human rights abuses in a lot of these countries. They choose to focus on the U.S. policy towards it. So the premise that people are defending authoritarian behavior is out of the gates already very fallacious. It's not true. Oh, wow. Okay, so the article is actually specifically against Venezuela and what the article refers to as quote unquote leftist, purportedly leftist states. Interesting. Sorry, I'm just reading this for the first time now, so I'm digesting it. So this is interesting. This is a little different than I thought it was going to be. So the author of this article is criticizing people who say that you shouldn't criticize Nicolas Maduro, and that if you do, you're playing into sort of a U.S. regime change propaganda in Venezuela. That's a little bit different than what I was expecting. Let's see. Yeah, this, to be completely honest, I would need to think on this article a little bit because it's like coming from a slightly different angle than I originally thought. Terror Toddler. This article is basically, it's not even really pushing the whole agenda of why all these other different countries are supposedly imperialist and why they're authoritarian and anti-imperialist shouldn't defend them. It's completely revolving around the idea that kind of has come up a lot on Media Roots Radio. The idea that if you are criticizing, say, Maduro during an active, ongoing regime change attempt, then you are playing into U.S. imperialism. And you probably should be really careful about what you're saying and when you're doing it. I mean, that's obviously a position that I've taken for a long time. But at the same time, like there still has to be room to criticize Maduro on some level, but not the way that the article is alleging. The article is basically just bouncing off of some anti-regime change article in Venezuela. It's not. Yeah, you threw me a little bit of a curveball with this one, Terror Toddler. I'm gonna have to think on it. But I mean, obviously, I don't agree with the premise of this article. But we're gonna start seeing more arguments like this coming up, because one of the things, of course, Bernie Sanders likes to do is to be very critical of Maduro, Hugo Chavez, some of these leaders, and to try to differentiate himself from that brand of socialism. So I think we're gonna see more and more articles from Jacobin and other places trying to reinforce this beliefs. No, don't apologize. I think I thought it was going to be easier to digest in real time, and I was going to have a better opinion in real time about it. But I need a little bit of time to think about how to address that. Bad Empanada. I never heard of his channel. I'll have to check it out. Obnob says, yes, this seems to be like a trot/leftcom article. Yeah, I mean, that is what it seems like, yes. I think I'm going to wrap up for today. I've already been going for an hour and a half. I hope you guys got something out of today's episode. And I hope some of the things I was saying about Fusion GPS and Paul Singer and the Steele dossier made sense. I hope that everybody is interested in taking a deeper look at that, and also will continue to try to figure out why Eli Lake is now piggybacking on all this Russiagate debunking stuff and what that's about. So thank you again for joining me on episode 37 of MAME Politics. We played very little Kamikaze Cabbie, but that's okay. And tomorrow we're going to do it again, episode 38. If you have any topic recommendations, if you have any game recommendations, please send them my way on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Fluorescent Grey. And if you want access to all of the aired episodes of MAME Politics so far, you can get them by becoming a subscriber of mine at Patreon, patreon.com/Robbie Martin. We have all 37 now episodes of MAME Politics available there if you subscribe to my channel for as little as $5 a month. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your Thursday, everybody.